There have been persistent rumors that Jim Jones worked for a CIA cover during his stay in Rio. The cover is said to have been an advertising agency. Jim Jones's activities in Rio was part of the so-called Odessa network. In this connection, Piers Paul Reed's The Train Robbers is of interest. Reed undertook to write the book more than a decade after the robbery and long after several other books had already been published on the subject. What made these unpromising circumstances augur well, according to Reed, were two things. First, he had the cooperation of most of the men who'd pulled off the robbery. Previously, only Ronald Biggs had given an account, and Biggs was considered an outsider by those who'd conceived and executed the plan. Second, and even more importantly, the gang confided important new information to Reed. This was that the train robbery and several of the subsequent escapes had been financed and finessed by General Otto Skorzeny. Secret and Suppressed 2, Hidden Ideas, Our Banned Ideas and Hidden History into the 21st Century, edited by Adam Parfrey and Ken Thomas. Hello and welcome to another edition of the Stench of Truth. I want to talk about FEMA concentration camps, REX-84, civilian detention facilities, martial law, Department of Homeland Security, domestic terrorism, that sort of thing. Well, as most of you know, I contacted DHS, and I'm very happy that a lot of you who have watched my videos have chosen to do so yourself. Contacting DHS and the Federal Emergency Management Agency about FEMA camps, the supposed FEMA camps. And I just wanted to give you an update to tell you that I have received acknowledgement letters from various agencies saying that they received my FOIA request, but I have not received any actual answers. I have not received any documents as of yet, so I'm planning to do some follow-up letters, which I would also suggest that you do as well. Now, there's a lot of talk amongst people about, well, why even bother? Why bother to do this or why bother to do that? Because, you know, you write a letter to FEMA and ask them about this, they're just going to lie to you. Well, they might just lie. They might lie, they might not give you information. There's a lot of possibilities that could happen, but certainly doing nothing and complaining about it is not an option, not anymore. It simply isn't. So, you know, if you want to sit back and say, oh, I'm not going to do anything because it's not going to do any good, I'm not going to try to get any answers because they're just going to lie. Well, you know, if you put enough pressure on somebody, they're going to have to do something. And even if they refuse to answer, that could provide information that we could use, or that would enable us to tell exactly what's going on. So then again, there's the idea that there are two schools of thoughts when it comes to the FEMA camp controversy, and that is, on the one side, it's a giant conspiracy theory that there are no such things as FEMA camps, there's no such thing as detention centers. And then on the other side, you have the all the way down the rabbit hole conspiracy theorists to talk about underground bases and aliens and everything else. So you have to understand that there's a huge amount of disinformation poured into this subject. Now, let's look at it from a rational perspective, okay? Now ask yourself this. How far of a stretch is it to imagine that the United States government has a system in place in case there are massive protests and riots in this country, or massive domestic terrorism, quote unquote, in this country, that they would have a system in place whereby they could house and keep a large number of people who are engaged in these type of activities? Is that very hard for you to fucking understand? And what about that doesn't make any sense? Okay? So, if you want to look at this in a very rational, logical, reasonable way, just look back to REX-84 and Operation Garden Plot and some other things that come out of the 1980s and even earlier. There certainly were plans in effect going that far back. So why is it so far of a stretch to imagine that there are plans in effect today to do the same thing? Now, it's just a matter of what circumstances would arise that would cause this to come into play, and for how long people would be detained, where those detention centers are, and who would be in charge of them. So when we try to find out some of this information, even a lack of response is a response in and of itself. So instead of doing nothing but complain about how it's foolish to even try, maybe you ought to think about this in a very logical way. And then also look at it in a very rational way and say, yes, there absolutely is 100% proof for underground military bases around the country. There is absolute proof for there being bases around the country that are not underground. Okay? There are abandoned military bases that are still fenced in. There's a lot of government land that is owned that is currently off limits. Okay? All of these things are true. Okay? When you go down the rabbit hole into some of the ridiculous notions that have been foisted into this arena, like alien-human hybridization and alien vats underneath the Dulce and all of these other way, way far out there things, you look at it and you say, this has been tacked on to something in order to take away the credibility of the actual thing itself. Okay? Shred away all of the nonsense and bullcrap, and there's a kernel of reality there. That's what we have to focus on. So, are there FEMA camps? The question is a good one. And the answer is, should there not be FEMA camps? If you consider the government the way it is, and you consider the way things are in this country, and consider the laws that have been passed, and the rights that have been destroyed in this country, shouldn't we expect that the government have this type of program in place? So shouldn't it be instead foolish for us to think that they don't have FEMA camps or some other named same purpose facilities? That's really what it boils down to. So don't believe all the hype and propaganda, but realize that there's a fundamental truth to all of this. You know, when you see these shaky videos of people running up to so-called FEMA trains and all of this other nonsense that get, tens of thousands of views on YouTube or whatever, don't jump into Wonderland and start believing in all this other nonsense that goes along with this. But at the same time, don't dismiss it outright. If you're of a very rational sense of mind, realize that you're stupid to believe that there would not be a program like this in effect, considering the state of affairs in this country. That's the bottom line. We should expect that there is such a thing, whether it's run by FEMA or somebody else. There should be a system of camps. Not that it's right, constitutional, legal, lawful. None of those things matter. What matters is the reality of life and the reality of life in this country. And that is that the rational, reasonable response for people to make is that we should expect that there is a fucking program in place to round up dissidents, to round up mobs, and to round up people who would finally decide that they've had enough, so-called domestic terrorists. That is a reasonable and rational thing to think. So if you think there is no such program, you're the one who's not being rational, you're the one who is not being reasonable, and you're the one who is not using logic. So what's the real conspiracy theory? Thank you. Good night.